Okay.
Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books. We're thrilled to be hosting this event celebrating the publication of Tomás Morin's new memoir, Let Me Count the Ways. We're happy to also welcome Laura Marris to the reading as well. Laura will be reading first, and then we will hear from Tomás. And after the reading, Tomás and Laura will be in discussion. And then if there is time, we will have a short audience Q&A. So if you're joining us via Zoom and there's a question you'd like to ask, please enter that in the chat and we will try to get to it after the reading and discussion. First up, Laura. Laura Marris is a writer and translator. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Yale Review, The Believer, The Point, and elsewhere. Her recent translation include the work we're going to be discussing today, Albert Camus' The Plague, and Geraldine Schwartz's Those Who Forgot. With Alice Kaplan, she is the co-author of States of Plague, Reading Albert Camus in the Pandemic, which is forthcoming fall of this year. She is currently at work on her first solo authored book, The Age of Loneliness, which will be published by Graywolf 2024. Laura?
Thank you so much, Becky and Malvern Books, and thank you so much, Tomás, for including me here. It's a real pleasure to read with you and to have lived with your very, very beautiful book the past few days. Let Me Count the Ways is incredible and so excited to be here to celebrate it. So I am going to read you a short passage from The Plague, and I think all of you really need to know before I start is maybe two things. First, that Joseph Grand is a clerk in City Hall in the city of Oran, where this plague is happening. And he is working on a novel that he's trying to start for the whole duration of the book. And the first sentence is what he's stuck on. And it's a sentence about a woman on horseback in a fancy park in Paris called the Bois de Boulogne. And the other thing you might need to know is that Ria is the doctor and Teru is kind of his right-hand man. All right. From this point of view, the narrator guesses that Grand, more than Ria or Teru, was the real example of the calm virtue that animated the public health squads. He had said yes without hesitation, with his usual goodwill. He had only asked to make himself useful with the small tasks. He was too old for the rest. From 6 to 8 p.m., he could offer his time. And when Ria thanked him warmly, he was astonished. What could be easier? There's a plague. We must defend ourselves. That's clear. If only everything were so simple. And he would go back to his sentence. Sometimes in the evening, when the work of record keeping was done, Ria talked with Grand. They eventually included Teru in these conversations, and Grand confided in his two companions with more and more obvious pleasure. These two followed with interest the patient work Grand continued in the midst of the plague. They too, in the end, found a kind of relief in it. How's the equestrian doing? Teru would often ask, and Grand would invariably reply, she's trotting, with a difficult smile. One evening, Grand said that he had finally abandoned the adjective elegant for his equestrian, and from now on he was using svelte. It's more concrete, he added. Another time, he read his two listeners the first sentence with this change. One fine May morning, a svelte equestrian rode a superb sorrel mare down the flowering lanes of the Bois de Boulogne. Don't you think, said Grand, that we can see her better? And I liked one May morning better because month of May lengthens the trot a bit. Then he appeared to be very preoccupied with the adjective superb. It wasn't conveying enough, according to him, and he was looking for the word that would capture in one go the lavish mare he imagined. Plump wouldn't work. It was concrete, but a little pejorative. Shining had tempted him for a moment, but the rhythm was off. One evening, he triumphantly announced that he had found it, a black sorrel mare. According to him, black always indicated a subtle elegance. That's not possible, said Ria. And why not? Sorrel isn't a breed, it's a color. What color is it? Well, a color that isn't black in any case. Gran seemed very concerned. Thank you, he said. Thank goodness you're here, but you see how difficult it is. What do you think of sumptuous? Asked Teru. Gran looked at him. He thought about it. Yes, he said, yes. And a smile slowly appeared. A little bit later on, he admitted that the word flowering embarrassed him. Since he'd never known anywhere beyond Oran and Montélimar, he sometimes asked his friends to explain how the lanes of the Bois were flowered. Strictly speaking, they had never given Ria or Teru the impression of being so, but the clerk's conviction made them doubtful. He was shocked by their uncertainty. Only artists know how to look, he said. Once the doctor found him in a state of great excitement. He had replaced flowering with full of flowers. He rubbed his hands. At last you can see them, you can smell them. Hats off, gentlemen. He read the sentence aloud triumphantly. One fine May morning, a svelte equestrian rode a sumptuous sorrel mare down the lanes full of flowers of the Bois de Boulogne. But when he read it aloud, the two prepositional phrases at the end of the sentence echoed irritatingly, and Gran stammered a little. He sat down, looking devastated. Then he asked the doctor if he could go home. He needed to think for a bit. It was around that time, we later learned, that he started letting slip signs of distraction at work that were seen as unfortunate during a moment when City Hall had to confront overwhelming duties with diminished personnel. His work suffered, and his boss reproached him severely by reminding him that he was paid to accomplish a task that he was obviously not accomplishing. It seems, the boss says, that you're doing volunteer work for the public health squads outside of this office. That's none of my business, but your work here is my business. And the main way to make yourself useful in these terrible circumstances is to do your job well. Otherwise, the rest won't help at all. He's right, said Gran to Ria. Yes, he's right, the doctor agreed. But I'm distracted and I don't know how to wrap up the end of my sentence. He had thought about removing de Boulogne, reasoning that everyone would still understand. But then the sentence seemed to link flowers to what was supposed to modify lanes. He had also considered the possibility of writing the lanes of the Bois full of flowers, but the placement of Bois between a substantive and a qualifier, arbitrarily separating them, was a thorn in his side. Some evenings he actually seemed even more tired than Ria. Yes, he was exhausted by this search that absorbed him totally, but he nonetheless continued to write up the sums and the statistics the public health squads needed. Patiently, every evening, he made the records clear, accompanying them with graphs, and he slowly endeavored to present his accounts as precisely as possible. Quite often, he would meet Ria at one of the hospitals and ask him for a desk in some office or infirmary. He would set up there with his papers the same way he set up at his post in City Hall, and in the air thickened by disinfectants and the disease itself, he fanned the sheets of paper to dry the ink. He honestly tried, then, to stop thinking about his equestrienne and to do only what was required. Yes, if it's true that people insist on offering themselves examples and models of what they call heroes, and if there absolutely must be such a one in this story, the narrator proposes precisely this insignificant, unassuming hero who had nothing going for him but a little goodness at heart and a seemingly ridiculous ideal. This will give the truth its due, make the equation 2 + 2 = 4, and put heroism in the secondary role it deserves, just after and never before the generous demands of happiness. At least, that was Dr. Ria's opinion as he read the newspaper or listened to the radio, hearing the pleas and encouragement that the outside world managed to send the infected city. Along with the aid sent by air and overland, every evening through the airwaves or in the press, pitying or admiring comments rained down on the now isolated city. And every time, the tone of an epic or of a prize ceremony made the doctor impatient. Of course, he knew this concern wasn't faked, but it could only be expressed through the language of convention, in which humans try to express what connects them to humanity. And that language couldn't apply to Grand's small daily efforts. It couldn't comprehend, for instance, what Grand meant in the middle of the plague. At midnight, sometimes, in the great silence of the deserted city, at the moment he reached his bed for a too short sleep, the doctor turned the dial of his radio. And from the corners of the world, across thousands of kilometers, these unfamiliar and brotherly voices clumsily tried to express their solidarity by actually saying it. But in the same breath, they revealed the terrible inability every person experiences in truly sharing a pain they cannot see. Oran, Oran. In vain the cry crossed the sea. In vain Rieu held himself alert. Soon the eloquence grew, even further accentuating the fundamental separation that estranged Grand from the orator. Oran, yes, Oran, but no, thought the doctor. To love together or to die together, there is no other recourse. They are too far away. I think I'll leave you there. Thank you so much.
Oh, Becky, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. Laura, I was just saying that I'm just always so impressed by people who can do wonderful translations of these, landmark works and just be able to convey what's in that book. I think it's such a challenge to do, and I'm just incredibly impressed when people can do that. And that was a really wonderful reading. Thank you. And next we're celebrating Tomás. Tomás Q. Morín is the author of most recently of the poetry collection Machete and the memoir Let Me Count the Ways. He is co-editor of the anthology Coming Close, 40 essays on Philip Levine, and translator of The Heights of Macchu Picchu by Pablo Neruda. His work has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, Poetry, Slate, and Boston Review. Tomás?
Thank you, Becky. And Malvern and Laura for that wonderful, just really amazing reading. That I feel like with all the great writers, Camus, like you have to hear him. You have to hear him and not just read him on the page, because he's incredible, but just hearing him in the air, it just really comes to life in a different way. Thank you so much for reading with me. And thank you everyone who's jumped on and who is watching from Zoom land. So I'm going to read this, start with this short vignette from Let Me Count the Ways called On Names. When I was growing up, so this is about my hometown, Mathis. When I was growing up, you could probably go in many neighborhoods where people were up to no good in the coastal Bend area and mention El Indio. And if someone didn't know him, they knew someone who did. As far as nicknames go, Indio and Chief are pretty good. I mean, what guy wouldn't want to be called Chief? In Mathis, Texas, many people had nicknames. The one catch was that you couldn't pick your own. If you tried, you'd be ignored and get called by whatever nickname your body suggested. Or worse, some interesting lie about you that was making the rounds. One guy everyone called Tick. He was short, overweight, and had the kind of plump, happy face you get after gorging on the neighbor's dog. Another guy was named Rana because he had a voice so raspy it reminded you of a frog croaking. Had Tom Waits been from Mathis, Rana would have had competition for his name. A group of people could also be given a nickname. Someone walking down the road one day looked in a yard where kids were crawling in a tree like monkeys. That was all it took for those brothers and sisters to be called Los Changos. A pair of brothers from another family were Los Calcetines, after someone saw them playing outside as children with nothing on their feet but long socks. The nickname didn't always end with the person it was given to. When a man named La Víbora had children, it seemed like the most natural thing to call all of his kids snakes too. In conversation, that family was then known as Las Víboras. If you had been nicknamed La Paca because your long torso with no curves reminded people of a rectangular hay bale, then when you had children who inherited the shape of your body, of course, everyone was going to call your kids Las Paquitas. Physical disabilities were not out of bounds. If I had had a bum leg I dragged behind me, I might have been nicknamed Escoba because of the sweeping motion my leg made. A boy who was born mute was called Mudo. A man who was my father's age was El Columpio, after his legs that had been twisted by polio made him swing his arms and legs when he walked. While calling someone a swing sounds cruel, he smiled when I saw someone yell, Columpio! And why wouldn't he smile when having a nickname meant he belonged? Besides, who wouldn't want people to say your name and think of kids laughing as they swung from the earth to the sky like pendulums of joy? This is the opening of a chapter titled Shamefaced. And the little epigraph comes from Elizabeth Barrett Browning's famous poem. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. My lips should be the color of figs. Around the edges, the soft purple tint still remains. My lips were the same color as my father's until I entered the 6th grade. This was around the time when my mom told him to leave and not come back. It was also when I started to walk around with the collar of my shirts in my mouth. Did I love the salty taste of my sweat my collars would collect? Sure. But I also hated the way the wet material would feel against my chest when I dropped it from my mouth. Why did I do something that would have drawn attention to me, that would have made me run the risk of being seen as a weirdo? Because it felt good. It felt good to hide a third of my face in my shirt. If my collar was in my mouth, then no one would know whether I was smiling or frowning. With my father gone, I didn't know how to be anymore. His leaving left me with questions I didn't know how to answer. Should I still keep an eye out for the police? Was it safe to invite friends over now? Did people know he had gone back to his family? When would I see him? Did I still have to sleep lightly in case I was needed in the middle of the night? Was I still his son? Did he still love me? Love us? I didn't know the answer to any of those questions that circled in my mind over and over. What I did know was that I felt calm with part of me hidden under the tent of my shirt. Sometimes I would even pull my arms inside my shirt so that I was even more hidden. What I know now is that the salt on my collars dried out my lips. Once my lips were dry, they broke, and in breaking, bits of them lifted and curled. Those tiny bits of skin were like braille on my lips. At first, I just ran my tongue against them over and over. One day, I pulled my upper lip in and rubbed it against my teeth. My eye watered as the thin strip of skin I had just peeled away hung down from my lip. I had pulled it away so fast and easy, I felt the pain after the fact. There was nothing left to do but pull it off. It was so thin I could barely feel it between my fingers. I thought pulling it fast and hard would hurt less. I was wrong. Instead of breaking right off, the strip of skin pulled farther up my lip and bled. After I wiped away more tears, I twisted the skin gently between my fingers until it broke off at the base. As the months passed and I kept sucking on my shirt collars, I continued to pull the skin from my lips. Before long, it became a game to see how long I could make a strip of skin before it reached the edge of my lip. When one lip would become sore and needed time to heal from the damage, I would let it rest by peeling the skin from the other lip. Peel, bleed, twist, repeat. For some reason, no one seemed to say anything about my collar chewing or the awful state of my lips. Before long, I discovered scabs. The first time I squeezed the pimples on my arms dry, there was nothing left but blood. I thought that would be the end of it. By the next day, rough discs covered the small spots on my arm I had messed with. When the scabs were hard enough, I peeled them off slowly. I stared at the little circle of dried blood on the tip of my finger. My body had somehow magically made it overnight. I marveled at how something so perfect and simple could have come from me. The next day, it was back, only a little bigger. For a while, I entertained myself by trying to make the scabs as big as possible by pulling them off at just the right times. Because they were hidden under my shirt sleeves and sometimes my arms were inside my shirt, no one noticed the constellations of scars I was building on my upper arms. By the middle of that school year, sucking my shirt collars and peeling my scabs stopped making me feel better. Without the salt from my collars to dry out my lips, they stopped peeling. When my lips healed, their purple had been replaced with the pale pink of a grapefruit wedge when you hold it up to the light. My new obsession was spitting. I'd seen my father spit all my life. When I launched a thin stream of spit 8 feet away, the guys in my grade were impressed. One of them even called me Scupitin whenever he would see me. I thought to myself, this is it. This will be the nickname by which everyone in Mathis will know me. I would be Scupitin, the son of El Indio. I imagined that wherever I would go, people would greet me with a smile because my name was fun to say. My nickname never caught on. After a month, even the guy who thought up the name stopped calling me that. Nothing had changed. I was still as invisible as I had been before I had quietly mutilated my lips and arms. My father was gone, for good this time. While my mouth was now a lighter color and no longer a small replica of his, I felt connected to my father every time I spit. He was the man and I was the shadow. Every day for the next 15 years, I spit on the ground without apology. Then the day came when I saw a young man do it. Shame rushed warm through my body, and I stopped. For 5,475 days, I had been my father's son. And then I wasn't, and I let him go. And this is the opening, and I'll finish with this. On counting. The green light is long and traffic is thick. My car inches forward. I count nearly everything I see. Sidewalks, stairs, cars, the tires and doors of those cars, not to mention the blocks they are parked alongside. On other days, I've counted little things too. Books, forks, carpets, shadows, chairs, even people's feet. Once, I even counted the soft blue stripes of a man's shirt. I can't tell you what year it was or if I saw him in Chicago, Provincetown, Santa Cruz, or somewhere else. I can't even remember whom I was with or even what I was wearing. But the stripes, the thumbnail-thick ocean blue stripes on white cotton, were like the bars of a fence behind which was a land of peace I had only dreamed of. In all the years my memory has carried the stripes from some random person's shirt, they have never changed. My counting is not most people's counting. I never drove through a city like some human adding machine, the city limits sign in my rear view and my head buzzing with numbers. What good would it be to anyone if I knew that on a certain day, in a certain year, I saw 26 spoons moving in and out of 26 bowls in a restaurant you've never been to? There was no 1, 2, 3 for me. I have no desire to tangle with a string of numbers you can wind around the planet until the end of time. 2 more cars, and I can turn left. I blink my left eye when I line up with the ass end of a car, then blink my right eye when I'm at the center, and the left again when I reach the front bumper. I've done this for every car on the street since I left my apartment. The slow traffic has made this block easier, a block whose start, middle, and end I also mark. And every building on this block, and the windows and doors of each building, at least as many of them as I can. These patterns are something I can depend on. They are inviolable, perfect, and all my own. The traffic is finally moving, and the palm trees I love are in the rear view. Sometimes when a certain itch creeps into my spirit and I feel misplaced, I'll scratch it by making the block and driving slow, because the palms against the wall of the white stucco Methodist church can trick you into thinking you could be on a side street of an island instead of in the middle of Texas. My mother's grandfather used to say his family was from the Canary Islands. People say time moves slower on an island. That would be nice if it were true, but I don't believe it. Time is time, isn't it? Going downhill now. 10 minutes and I'll be home. Since my eyes can't keep up with all the counting now that I'm driving faster, I also tap my fingers and toes, clench and unclench my jaw, even flex the muscles of my arms and legs when the blocks are particularly crowded. While I'm driving and thinking about not breaking any traffic laws and where I am going and the time of day, and thus how long before the sun goes down and countless other things, I also have in my head left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, going a mile a minute. For years, I assumed left, right, left was in everyone else's head too. If you could measure the world and know where everything began and ended, why wouldn't you? Another left turn and the river is to my right now, and the buildings are fewer and farther apart. I glance at the door locks again. I'm driving over 20 miles an hour. I remind myself there are limits to what a human being can do. My parents taught me early that their love had its limits. I wish I could have mapped out their love. My counting is a way for me to return the things people have made to the blueprint stage. Since people don't have blueprints, maybe when I count a part of them, like what they're wearing, it's closer to mapping. I wish I could have set their love for one another like islands against a field of oceans and wrapped them tight with an equator. Park, ignition off, windows up, parking brake, keys and phone in my right hand, wallet in the left. I stay off the grass because some people don't pick up after their dogs. Inside, I put my things away, and the Virgen de Guadalupe on my dresser reminds me I was given a Bible I haven't read because I don't want to open it and discover one of my favorite parts is missing. The chapter where they begin talking about how so-and-so begat 3 sons and 2 daughters and lived 340-something years. Most probably skip those genealogies, surely most 9-year-olds, but I've read every single one of them when I was a kid. What you miss if you skip the biblical genealogies is how in all that begetting and centuries of death, there was one single break to speak of. The story was written. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And that was it. The one break in the divine sequence up to that point. Enoch was not, meaning he didn't die and was just no more, carried off to someplace else, delivered from all the endless birth and dying. Even though I talked to God all the time when I was a kid, I didn't know what it meant to walk with him. What I did know was how to take the measure of the world, to love the end that everything had coming, even as my own seemed like it would be denied to me forever and ever. Thank you.
Wonderful. Tomas, that was just lovely. Laura was right when she said this is a lovely book, and I really look forward to reading all of it because I think it's going to be just wonderful. You had me laughing when you were talking about the nicknames because I remember that from my growing up and the crazy things my parents would call people, and I'd say, that sounds horrible. They'd say, oh no, what's the problem with it? He's a friend of ours. So that's just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to have a little discussion between you and Laura. So let's go ahead and do that.
Thanks so much, Becky. So we thought we would start by just talking about the kind of perceptions of illness in these 2 books, and particularly perceptions of an illness that seems new or is at the beginning of its onset, and how that kind of slices into the world of a book. So super curious, Tomas, how you work that into your process.
Yeah, I was, I remember the first time I heard about OCD. It was it was an MTV show. It was an MTV show, and what I remember very clearly is that they were following around this poor guy who he had what I think became because it was MTV, right? He had a presentation of OCD, which for him meant he couldn't leave the house until, I mean, he had to do all sorts of other rituals, but he couldn't leave the house. Like the last thing was washing his hands, right? So I remember watching this guy, and I don't know, he had washed his hands probably like 30 times, and time was just marching on, right? Time was marching on, but he was still captured, right? Captured within this, these few seconds, right? These few seconds that it takes us, that takes most people, right, to do what I think we take for granted, a sort of simple act. And he was just kind of like caught on this loop. And yeah, and then after that, because I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder in, I want to say it was 2001. And even then, like when I was diagnosed by the doctor, like I was shocked. Because I had in my mind that certain presentations that had, popped up in the media in the late 90s, and because mine didn't present in that way, I had no idea. So then once I found out about it, and then I started researching it and realized that it's an incredibly complex anxiety disorder, and that it manifests in very different ways. It really got me to thinking about how many people have this condition, and are kind of invisible, and not seen because they don't match the sort of our countries or our cultures stereotype of neatness, right? And yeah, so I really tried to think hard, like in the book, how can I present my obsessive compulsive disorder, but then also present other people seeing it, and also show the ways in which people didn't see it. The scab picking, the munching on my collar, like the stuff with my lips, like all of that stuff was part of it. Like I didn't know, if you look, if you do some research, like those are symptoms, right? They show up, right? It's like biting your nails,
Yeah.
I was an incredibly anxious kid. I didn't know what the word anxiety meant. So I was creating all these sorts of rituals. So for me in the book, it was important to try to portray how it presents in me as honestly as possible, but then also present other people seeing it or not seeing it, to try to create a sort of, rounded picture that I hope, doesn't come across as, as preachy or like anything like that, but just more of, like an experience, an experience for someone, for a reader.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about the part where you're thinking like, isn't everyone else doing this in their head too? Like, wouldn't you order the world if you could? And I think that resonated so much with me, partly because of my own anxieties, but also because of translating the plague and thinking about how everybody's kind of the first thing that happens when the quarantine begins is this sense of separation from the world. And it's not just like, oh, we can't go through that gate anymore. It's like we've been separated from the life that we knew beforehand.
Right.
And in that sense, like the onset of symptoms is like opening a door to a different way of being entirely. But what's really interesting in the plague is the way the different people who are all within this same city, they're all under the same quarantine, the ways they do sometimes fail to see in each other that sense of separation from their, what they thought of as their normal life.
Right.
And I think you capture that so beautifully, like the way that as soon as you realize something has kind of estranged you from what you thought of as normal, all of a sudden it's like a whole nother level of having to incorporate that. And I think it's Grand who says to Rio at some point, like, I'm exerting so much effort just to be normal, just to be perceived. And he's obviously, he never, fortunately for us, he never manages to be normal.
Right.
That would be such a loss.
I'm curious, when you were because you translated this book over the last few years, right? So I'm curious about like for you describing, like what was it like describing or translating these passages about quarantine, passages about city leaders, who are being pleaded with, to do more, but then, are not. And while parallel things are happening, in our country, and like, what was that like?
Yeah, I think this actually segues into the second question that we were thinking about, which is like this idea of translation and writing being a way of kind of apprenticing yourself to a particular part of the world. And for me, translation is definitely a way of apprenticing myself to writers that I admire. And so for me, translating this book, like during the pandemic, I was really I was learning a lot from Camus about restraint and how restraint can make a passage so much more moving. Like actually, holding back the rhetorical dazzle can sometimes be such a way to let someone in, to see the truth of the world as the author wants to convey it. And so I had to struggle too. And I had to struggle with like my restraint as a translator too, which was not something I really thought about before. But like you say, the voices of these officials and stuff, it was so tempting to make them sound like, government officials that we know all too well who are denying the pandemic is happening. But I didn't want to do that because there's a kind of integrity to the world of this book that I was kind of I had to let it speak for itself,
Yeah.
But
there's always a temptation, I feel like, as a translator, like when I was translating Neruda, Heights of Macchu Picchu has many moments of ambiguity in there, because the speaker is on this quest, and lots of moments where he's confused, and you get to these moments, and the writer part of you is like, oh, I can clean up this ambiguity, but it's like the ambiguity is there for a reason, yeah. And you just have to stay faithful and bring it over.
Well, and for you too, I'm so curious, like with your book, with Let Me Count the Ways, if there was a kind of feeling of because some of the moments when like there's counting, or when you talk about silence, they did remind me of some of the themes in the plague, and I'm just wondering if there were other books maybe that were kind of carrying you through the writing process of that.
Well, there were two that were really, really key. One was Frank Conroy's Stop Time. And that one really, it was like my master class in like how to write from a child's perspective. And then Maxine Hong Kingston's Chinaman. Like, I love The Woman Warrior, and it's one of my all-time favorite books. But Chinaman really helped me figure out the structure of Let Me Count the Ways, of how to like balance these long chapters about family life with these vignettes that are like a couple that I read, these vignettes that are they just kind of like pop in and then out, like my adult voice, right? My adult voice pops in and out and gives some perspective, but also it's almost like an aside, that was really key. And when I wrote the first draft, it was just a blob. It was just like this blob that had no shape, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was rereading John Berriman's Dream Songs, and I'll have to confess, and my poet friends who are on the Zoom will chide me about this, but I never liked the book. I couldn't get into it, and I couldn't finish it. But probably about every summer, I would try to read it again. So I understand that. So I thank you. So I had this blob, right? I had this blob of this first draft, and then I started reading the Dream Songs. And then there's that image of him sitting up in a tree and feeling incredibly happy. And it reminds me of the passage in my first draft of sitting up in a eucalyptus tree and feeling really happy. I thought, that's interesting. So then I read the next Dream Song, and then some image from there reminded me of another passage. So then I thought, I wonder if I can use the dream songs as a sort of random vignette generator.
I
So
love that.
I ended up creating, so that blob turned into 52 vignettes. I never made it to the 77. Yeah, you know, it's, you know, I'm always a poet, you know, always a poet, and I love the dream songs now. But it was just something, yeah, like that book like really helped me chop it up, and then eventually some of those, you know, recoalesced, you know, into longer chapters. But yeah.
That's so interesting because it's sometimes the books that resist you at first that are the most valuable in the end.
Yeah.
I think I felt that with the style of The Plague too, because sometimes it's so spare. It's like almost like a lyric poem where if it's not just right, the spareness falls flat, you know, the restraint might as well be cardboard. So that was, but I love that connection to the dream songs. That's so cool.
Well, should we see if anyone has any questions by chance? And if not, that's fine too. This would normally be the time when we would, you know, hit the cookie table, and, you know, have some coffee and
then chat, yes.
Yeah, and chat and buy books. And,
Well, actually, Tomás, hello?
Yep.
There you go.
Hi, there's Armando here.
Hey, Armando.
Hey, pleasure. I'm sorry I'm not jumping on because we have a puppy and I'm dealing with the puppy.
No
But I
worries.
wanted to be here for this. So thank you both, Tomás and Laura, for your beautiful readings. So I had a question, and I guess, Laura, I don't know much of your background, but it sounds like you're also a poet, of just kind of approaching nonfiction work, because I'm getting ready to jump into that adventure as well, as a poet, and just kind of like so then that journey and that process, at what points did you feel like, I don't know if restricted is the right word, but I felt like, okay, do I have to like kind of put the poet hat over here to the side for a moment to just sort of get a little more like prosy and a little more like, you know, lengthen the lines of things, or were you always feeling like, okay, the poet's gonna be in the driver's seat and he's just gonna like kind of shape whatever it is for this idea that, you know, of a memoir?
Such a great question. You know, I think like a long time ago, I felt like I started noticing certain things. Like there's certain writers, like Hemingway has a book of poems that he published early on. Faulkner had like a book of poems, and they're awful, right? They're awful, but those book collections are awful. But that lyricism, right, translated into their prose in really incredible and surprising ways. So in the end, I think like I wouldn't think like poet hat, prose writer hat, just think writer hat. You know, you are who you are as a writer. Like your gifts are your gifts, and they're going to show up. You know, let them all show up. Let them all show up, and try to find like-minded, let's say, nonfiction writers whose styles you really love. You really love and you admire. You're like, I could write something like that. You know, I could write like, so then you have these possibility models, you know, in mind, and, you know, hopefully they'll open the door.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I never feel like I take off the poet hat, even though I haven't written a poem in a very long time. And partly that was the pandemic, but I think partly, you know, your voice is your voice and carries you where it wants to go with a particular project. And for me, it's always harder. What I'm thinking of doing is how can I better listen to that voice right now? Not like, how can I put myself into the box of a different genre?
Yeah, because I think the genres are, I think they're really helpful if you're running a bookstore, right? If you're running a bookstore and you're trying to, you want to help a reader get from the front door to the book they're looking for as fast as possible. You know, I mean, we want them to meander too, but also, you know, those sort of silos, right? Those genre silos. I don't think they're that useful to writers, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that's also something that translation kind of freed me from.
Yeah.
Because they're like the genres are particularly strong in the US, but in France, no one cares. They just put literature on the back of the book. That's
I love that.
So it's kind of interesting, like how sometimes that lets you out of a way of thinking.
And Camus is so I'm like, how did he not write poems? Like his lyricism in that book of the early writings, the personal writings.
Yeah,
I'm like, I'm like, oh, like he puts like at least half of the poets in English writing right now to shame. Like it's just incredible, absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Well, there's a funny story about Camus, which I think is true, although it might be a little bit apocryphal, which is that when he started writing his first novel, which was really bad, he burned everything else that had come before that.
Wow.
So maybe there were poems and he burned them.
Wow.
So anyway.
That sounds like something he would do.
Yeah. He was like, fresh start.
Yeah.
Yeah, he divorced his first wife. He burned all his manuscripts, and then he wrote a really bad draft of a novel.
There was a question from Dolores, but I'm not sure if it's already been addressed based on your answers to the other question. She just talks about, first, of course, thank you for the wonderful readings. And I hope you all have had a chance to look at the great notes in chat about how many people really enjoy this. But she asked, could you both talk about how your poetry helps you move into prose or holds you back? So this is slightly different, I think, from what just said, but see would y'all respond to that one way or the other?
I think for me, my MFA is in poetry. I'm as surprised. I'm super surprised that I became a translator. That I've written a memoir. That I've published essays. I have a novel that I'm going to start later this summer. And yeah, because I went into an MFA with lots of silos, thinking like, oh, okay, this is the path, right? Yeah, so for me, it's been my curiosity that has just like led me to different projects. However, I think like from poetry, having a degree in poetry and studying it and writing it for so many years, it definitely, when I moved into prose, it's helped me be more, just like more in love with sentences, more in love with, as I think as opposed to plots to my detriment, yeah, just with to just love every sentence and every word and just really have this sort of micro attention. Not that fiction writers don't or prose writers don't, but yeah.
I like that a lot too, the craft of sentences. I think that's what got me through the translation of The Plague. Definitely, it's nice to like work on sentences that are beautiful. But yeah, I think poetry helps me create atmosphere and it makes me sensitive to tone. My MFA is also in poetry. But all the kind of shifts in voice and shifts in tone that kind of help to make a successful longer text. Sometimes I'm used to writing in such a compressed space that I really notice, I feel constantly the sense of like, you're going on too long. And I think poetry really teaches me when I need to shift and have a kind of dynamic transition to a different kind of voice, or at least a different tone of voice in my longer pieces. And that's something poetry has really taught me, because like the shifts between stanzas are always so dynamic in a poem because they're really pushing the poem forward. So I try to think about prose paragraphs like that too.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that y'all would like to add before we tie this up? Just anything?
Philip Metris asked, "What's next for each of you?"
Perfect question.
That's a great question. Yeah, so I have that this kind of weird kooky novel that which formally is going to be very experimental, that I want to try drafting this summer. And then the next book of poems, which is very much in conversation with John Coltrane's album, My Favorite Things. So I'm super excited to start writing and working on that.
That's great. I can't wait to read your novel. Poets' novels or people who cross those boundaries. It's always my favorite. Yeah, I'm writing this book of essays about landscapes where personal and ecological loneliness overlap and inform each other. So that is coming out. But I think probably I'll be working on that for the next year or so. There's still lots of chapters left to write.
That's a Graywolf, right? Is that right?
Yeah. It's called The Age of Loneliness. But I don't know what's after that. Maybe there is a book I'd love to translate that's about the Jardin d'Essai, the botanical garden in Algiers. It's a really beautiful novel, and the main character is a veterinarian at the kind of zoo within the botanical gardens who wants to undertake some memory work about its origins. So
wow.
Yeah, if I'd be lucky to get to translate that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's see.
But you do have another book coming out in the fall, correct, Laura?
True. Yeah. But that one's in press. It's out of my hands now.
That's done. Okay.
I just got the email from the production editor that said, you're done.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well, congratulations so much to you both. And it has really been wonderful. We've been really enjoyed having both of you here. The readings were fantastic. And so glad all of you who came really pleased that we had so many people attend, and we're here to enjoy the work. As putting on my Malvern Books hat, we do have books from both of our authors at the store. Feel free to come by the store at 613 West 29th Street today. We're open from 12 to 5. Or if you want to come by sometime during the week, we're open Tuesday through Sunday, 12 to 5, and we'd love to see you there. More information at malvernbooks.com. So thank you so much, everyone. And Tomás, thank you for choosing Malvern Books for your launch. And thank you so much for including Laura. It's been a wonderful opportunity to get to meet her as well.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And shout out to my editor, Courtney.
Wonderful.
Hey.
Yeah.
Congratulations. It's
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you. Thanks, Cyrus.
Thank you.